Well, welcome home. We are so glad to be back together today, and we're going to pick up where we were supposed to be starting last week, but we're going to pick up there today. A couple weeks ago, I got to go back home and go back to Indiana. It was the first time in almost 2 years that I got to go back and see my family. I got to see my little nephew, Bo. If those of you have met Bo, he's been out here once or twice before. And so I got to see Bo, and he was all excited. I got to meet my brand new nephew, who's 6 months old. He was born this last year on April Fools, and so I'm sure that will be fun for him for the rest of his life. But I got to meet my little nephew and go back and it's always something when you travel. And so my first flight out was like 6 something in the morning, 6:45 maybe, and so everybody has to be there like 4:45 in the morning, 2 hours before. And I don't know about you, but when you get surrounded by a whole group of people who've been up and at the airport since 4 in the morning, sometimes they're not all in the best mood. And so that first flight was a little interesting. I had a couple ladies on each side of me, and they each seemed to be a little persnickety that early in the morning. So I just kind of put on some headphones and kind of tuckered in for the ride and hit away and finally got back home and we got there, and my dad, he's like, do you care if we stop by Cabela's on the way back home? He said, I need to get some new hunting boots. He'd gone out earlier this year and realized that his had holes in them. They were done, and so he's like, I need to get some new ones, and he's like, there's one not too far off the way on the way home, and so I said sure, and it was going good except for all the construction, and then we missed our turn, and then we had to reroute, and so it took us a while, and then we finally get back to Peru, just a little bit past Kokomo, and we get to Peru, and I'm borrowing our pastor's daughter. She's the one getting married. That's why I went home to help with the wedding, and then I go in there, and we got in late. I said, we should be there by like 4 o'clock at the latest. It was like 7 o'clock. We rolled in. And they're all there. It's just a couple days before the wedding, and so the girls are out getting their nails done, but some of the family's there, and the guys are there, and so I'm talking with them, and I'm talking to Pastor Kevin, because I'm going to be preaching on Sunday, so we're talking about that, we're talking about the wedding, we're talking about these different things, and I'm not short-winded, as you know, and so that took a little while. And so we finally get in the car, and we head back to the house, and we've not had supper yet at this point, and so I'm like getting hungry. I've been traveling all day, and I walk into the house, and when I go in there, right, we're talking about what are we going to do for supper, something quick, something easy. We've been traveling for a while, so we're just ready to what can we eat right now? And my parents, my mom, you moms will all understand this. Like, no matter how old your kid gets, they're always going to be your kid. So I go home, and my mom's like, what are my favorite snacks? So she's like, up on different candies and on different things, and so I walk in, and she's got all this stuff laying, like little Debbie snacks, like all this unhealthy junk food sitting on the kitchen table as we're talking about what we're supposed to be eating for supper. And so as we're waiting and figuring out supper, and we had pizza and pizza rolls, by the way, and so as we're waiting on that, I reached in and I grabbed one of the candies off of the table, to which my 5-year-old nephew, without missing a beat, quickly told me, he said, you have to have protein first, right? Something that I am sure he has had told to him 100 different times, and that he was just parroting. But the moment I went to grab a piece of candy before we had dinner, he told me, he said, you've got to have your protein first. The rest of the week, I watched as my parents had to remind, or as my sister had to remind my nephew, we're eating and we're doing different things, and sometimes as adults you get to do things that kids don't, and that's just the joy of it. And so I'm having popcorn and M&Ms as we're watching a movie one night, and my sister tells my nephew, like, you're not just going to have only M&Ms, as he's just trying to dig through the M&Ms in his bowl of popcorn, right? And so my sister is trying to teach him that he's got to have a full balanced diet. He's got to have his protein, and he can't just live off of the candy. Sometimes for you and I as Christians, we've got to have that protein. You know, we come in and there's certain messages, they may make us feel good or they encourage us, but sometimes we got to have those messages and they may taste like broccoli or carrots, and it may not be our favorite thing, but it's something we know that is good for us. There's fiber, it's whatever we need. And we can't just take the parts of the Bible as we're growing and maturing and learning about Jesus and who we're supposed to be. We can't just pick and choose the parts of the Bible and say, this one makes me feel good, this one's encouraging, this one tastes good. But we've got to take the whole Bible to have a well-rounded diet so that we can become a well-rounded and a fully grown and strong Christian. One of those parts of the Bible that we need to eat to mature as Christians is what the Bible teaches about money. Now, some of you guys just rolled your eyes almost as hard as my nephew when he had to clean his plate, right? I saw that. Right? Money, though, is a central part of your life. Every single one of you go to work. Sometimes you don't like your work, but you go anyways. Why? Because we need money. Money is a part of every single person's life, whether they have money or whether they don't have money. It influences, it makes a difference, it makes an impact on our life. But the Bible has a lot of wisdom on money, and it teaches us on how to win with money. And so we're going to get ready to go into a series called Winning with Money. Because when we learn to handle money God's way, then we'll find out that anyone can win with money. And this isn't going to be a false prosperity gospel where I'm going to tell you that if you come in and you follow God, if you'll sow $1,000 into Pastor Seth this morning, then God's going to give you the miracle you've been waiting. That's not what the Bible teaches. I will take your $1,000, but it is not what the Bible teaches about unlocking everything we want in life. No, this series is going to be about stewardship. It's going to be about a biblical mindset on how we approach money and what the Bible teaches. Because here's what we need to understand is that there are things in the Bible that will apply whether somebody is a Christian or not. There's two kinds of promises the Bible has. There's conditional promises, right? And we go and God says, if you do this, then I'll do this. But then there's principle promises where it's whatever is true for anyone is going to be true for everyone, whether you're a Christian or not. And how we handle money is a principle promise. It means what you reap is what you sow. So that means if somebody's not a Christian, but they're going to sow something, then they're going to reap that same thing. Right? It's not a biblical promise. It is a stewardship promise. And so we're going to look at that. And these are principles that don't have anything to do with being a Christian, but they have to do with this is what the Bible teaches for anyone. That if you'll handle money this way, this is what will happen. Dave Ramsey is a leading voice in Christian finance circles. He is a financial advisor. He is a man who grew up in the church, but then he experienced bankruptcy. He experienced the bottom of the barrel where he had no money, and now he's flipped it around to be living with over $1 million. He's a millionaire. He's got money. He's successfully leading entrepreneurs. He's successfully leading as a financial advisor in the world today, and he's gone through, and he says, this is what I've done, as not as a pastor, but as a financial advisor. And he's gone through and he's filtered it through the Bible and said, hey, guess what I learned from the Bible as I've taken these principles in my own life. And so what he's done is he's created this class called Financial Peace University, where he teaches anybody who wants to learn about this is how you handle money and win, but he also teaches it with a biblical perspective. And he says, this is what the Bible teaches, and so this is why this works, because this is what the Bible teaches us about these principles. And so what we're going to look at as we go through this series comes from his teaching. This isn't me coming up as a pastor and saying, well, this is what the Bible teaches us, and as Christians, we're supposed to do this and this and this, and we should as believers. But this is somebody who's standing on the outside, who says, my life is about helping people succeed with money. My life has been going through that journey, failing, and now learning how to do things better so that now I can equip others to do that. And so we're coming not from a pastoral perspective, but from an outside perspective, telling you this is what the Bible teaches about handling and winning with money. And this may not be your favorite series. It may not be your favorite topic, but this is what I can promise you, that over the next few weeks as we go through this series, if you will take it and apply it, right? Don't just put it on a note page like food being put on a plate that we're never going to touch, but apply it, eat it, and I promise you that over time, as you begin to walk out these biblical principles, this will change your life. So let's dive in this morning, and together let's begin to win with money. When we talk about winning with money, it is a matter of disciplining ourselves and training our minds to think in a new way. Right? When we begin to talk about winning, the first place we begin is in our mind. It's forming new habits. It's beginning to train and discipline ourselves. This is the same for anybody that goes out and says, hey, I want to begin to build muscle. I want to get stronger. Or, hey, I want to lose weight, and that's my goal. Or, hey, I want to quit smoking. I want to change my lifestyle. I want to quit drinking. I want to lose this addiction. And these things where we have a certain mindset. Winning with money is the same way. It begins not just with changing habits, that's a part of it, but it begins with changing our mindset, understanding that the way things have got us where they are, but if we want to get somewhere else, we're going to have to begin to do things a little bit differently. Any major life change starts with retraining your mind. Winning with money is the same. It's all about disciplining our mind, and then our actions will follow. Zig Ziglar is a well-known motivational speaker. He started off as a salesman and eventually became a very well-known motivational speaker who would go around traveling around the world and speaking and encouraging and building people up. And this is what he said. He said, if you do things you need to do when you need to do them, then someday you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. If you do things you need to do when you need to do them, then someday you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. A lot of the world today is controlled by money. The income that they have, it controls them. It decides what they can and cannot do. But as you and I will retrain ourselves, if we will discipline ourselves, and this season, if we will discipline ourselves right now and begin to train ourselves and do the things that we need to do now, then one day we'll be able to do things that we can only dream of doing right now, because we'll have built up now the foundation for what we want to do then. So if we'll do the things that we need to do now, we will change the future. And this is one of those things that if you remember, I remember in high school, they come in and they'll say, well, if you'll put $2,000 a year from 18 to 30 into a savings account, then by time you retire, you'll have over $1 million. Right? And they would come in and they would teach those things, and financial advisors come in and do different things, trying to encourage people to do the right things. But the reality is, I don't know about you, but for the last 12 years, I finally hit 30. Putting $2,000 aside just didn't seem like a reality. Right? There's bills, life is happening, things are going on. It's just, there's times where those things are a struggle. But if we will learn to sacrifice, if we will learn to discipline ourselves and do now and figure out how can I make this much happen. I may not be able to do $2,000. I may not be able to do that. But if we'll learn to discipline ourselves now, then the reality of the future will drastically change as we step into things that right now we could only dream of. See, a part of this discipline is maturing ourselves. And one definition of maturity is learning to delay pleasure. Right? A kid does what they want, when they want. A kid says, this looks shiny, I want to touch it, this candy is good. It doesn't matter that it's going to rot my teeth out if that's all I do, or that I'm not going to have all the strength that I need to grow. They say this candy tastes good, so that's what I want. And so they take what feels good now. But as we mature, what we need to learn to do is devise a plan and follow it. We need to learn to say, well, I know this hurts now. I know this doesn't taste good now, but I know that this is what I need to get where I want to be. This is what I need to grow and to mature. And so if we will discipline our mind and our money habits now, then one day we will enjoy the things that we can only dream of. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11 says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Right? The Bible is telling us here, following Jesus isn't just meant to feel good. That if there's times where the pastor comes up and we need to be corrected and we don't take it, then we're going to miss out on what's happening because we've got to have that discipline. There's things in our life where the Bible talks about self-discipline, that if we refuse self-discipline because it's uncomfortable, we don't want to change, we're happy how we are, then it's not going to get us to where we are. But there is a discipline that's not going to feel good in the time, but in the future, it'll produce a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. It's like an athlete in a sport, and Paul uses that reference in other areas where he talks about being a boxer, and he says, I don't beat the air, but he says, I discipline my body to do what I need it to do. When we discipline ourselves, then one day we'll reach that place where we can be where we want to be. But it takes discipline to reach the place that very few ever reach. It takes years of dedication and practice for an athlete to make it into the professionals. It'll take dedication and commitment on our part to reach a place where very few around us will ever financially reach as we discipline ourselves and our habits. It's not just about a sprint, but this is a marathon. It is a lifestyle habit. It's not just eating the right meal once and saying, all right, I ate my salad, now I can't wait to lose 10 pounds because I ate a salad once today. Right? It's continuing day after day to do the right things, to discipline ourselves, to handle money differently. Proverbs 28:20 says, a faithful person will be richly blessed, but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished. The key to winning with money, the key to winning battles, the key is the blessing in life. It comes down in these two scriptures to two things: discipline and faithfulness. That we would take discipline when it's needed, that we would discipline ourselves when we need to, and that we would be faithful in those things. Right? A faithful person isn't called faithful for doing the right things once, but for being that way when they live. In our Bible in 1 year this year, we were reading through and it was talking about Ezekiel just this past week. And he says, Ezekiel, if I give you a warning to somebody who's been faithful, but they're walking away from their faithfulness and you do not warn them, he said, and they lose it, then he said, then that's going to come on you. They're no longer going to be viewed as faithful if they give up on the end, even though they were at one point. Right? Our faithfulness isn't just about, well, I was faithful in this season, but it's about being faithful to God through our entire lives. And it's as we continue to walk in faithfulness that we will be richly blessed. Changing our finances from where we are now, because every one of us is in a different place, right? Depending on how long we've been out of school, depending on where we live, our home, our vehicles, we don't know the debt. We're all coming into this from different places. We all are coming into this with different futures in mind, with different things as we're working towards. So this can be a different journey for each and every one of us. It's not going to be the same. But changing our finances from where we are, if we're starting out in a hole, if we're starting out with debt because of school or health or things that have happened that have been beyond our control, this can take time. From where we are to where God wants us to be can be even a several-year process. But it'll take commitment and discipline and faithfulness to the plan. But if you'll commit now and say, God, I'm trusting the process. I'm trusting that if I do this, then this is what I'll see. There's going to be times in the middle of the process when we want to quit, when we don't feel like it, when we're ready to just give up because it's hard. But if we'll commit to the process, then one day we will see things begin to break through. The Christian mindset and discipline with money is that of a long-term steward. Right? A steward is what the Bible talks about when it talks about us and money. Every single time we are a steward. We are not a owner, but we are a steward, a manager. Everything we have, our house, our car, our job, every last penny in the bank is not yours, and it is not mine. When we talk about the church, the money that we have as a church is not ours. It is not mine as a pastor. It is God's that we are responsible to steward. We are stewards of what God gives us, and God is the owner. The biblical mindset of money, the mindset of a mature Christian when it comes to money, is that we are a steward over every penny we have, over everything we own. We understand that God is the one who's given it to us. Our vehicle, our home, everything we have. It doesn't mean that we can't go out and buy things we like. Kayla and I were blessed this last week. We went out and we celebrated one day, and we had lunch, and we bought a couple things that maybe we normally wouldn't buy. But we were blessed, and so we were able to do that. There's times where we may be able to go out and do those things. It doesn't mean we never get what we want, but we've also got a mindset that not everything can be what we want because it's not our money. That we're called to steward what God has given us. This is the stewardship mindset. If you want to win with money, you've got to put God first, yourself second, and everything else third. All right, you can sum it up this way. If you want to win with money, you give first, you save, and then you pay. You put God first, yourself second, and then everything else will come third. To win with money, the first thing you've got to train your mind to do is give. This is biblical? Absolutely. We've done series on giving before. We've talked about the tithe. We've talked about those things that the Bible teaches. It is absolutely biblical, but it is also practical. These are things that, again, come from a financial advisor's perspective. He's saying that if you want to win with money, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to learn to give, because giving opens up the door. Matthew chapter 6 contains one of my absolute favorite verses in the Bible. It's one of them that I quote very often. We'll read it here in a second. But he starts off in Matthew chapter 6, and Jesus is talking about how sometimes there's things that we worry about. Right? You guys ever worry about the bills? How are we going to do this? How are we going to figure this out? How am I going to take care of this for my kids? Or how are we going to take care of this or that? And we're trying to figure those things out, and we're trying to worry about that. It's not anything new. It's been happening even since the Bible. And Jesus is going through it. He says, how often we worry about our food. And he says, we worry about the food and how we're going to get that. And we worry about our clothes and what we're going to wear. And we worry about our children. And we worry about this or that. And Jesus is saying, you worry about these things. But then we come into Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. And this is what he says. Right? He teaches us and he makes a promise that if we will put God first, that God will always meet the need. Right? When we try to take care of our things ourselves, we remove the opportunity for God to be able to step in. But Jesus says that if we will put God first, then God himself will step in every time and begin to meet our needs. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. The things that you worry about, the clothes, the food, the bills, Jesus is saying that if you will put God first, his kingdom, his righteousness, if you will make him the priority of your life, whether that's coming to church on a Sunday morning, whether that's in our giving, whether that's in the decisions we make, if we will put God first, then he says all these things will be given to you as well. You can carry a heavy burden. As you think about your family, as you think about the bills, as you think about where you're at and what's going on, as you think about everything that needs to be done, work, food, your home, bills, gas in the car, wanting your kids to have better things than you had growing up, wanting your kids to have things that maybe you didn't even have a chance to have. God's promise is that when you will put him first, when you will prioritize God and his kingdom, then he will take care of your every need. See, the Bible is full of paradoxes. We talked about it in Sunday school this morning where there's things that seem backwards, but God says, if you'll do this, then I'll make this work. Things like if we want to find ourselves, if we want to find our life, we've got to lose it. right? If we want to live, then we've got to die to ourselves. These things that seem contrary and backwards. One of the things the Bible says that this is going to seem backwards in your mind. You're going to look on paper and you're going to tell yourself, this will not work. This will not make sense. But God is saying that if you will do this in faith, then I will take care of you every single time. And giving is one of those things. You'll look at the bills, you'll look at your bank account, and you will say, I cannot afford to give to the church. There is no money left over, even if I want to. And if there is, then I'll do it at the end. But if you will, by faith, give to God what you can't afford, every time you'll find that God will come through and that you will still have everything you need. We've got to learn to discipline our minds to this level of faith, to this level of maturity. We're responsible also to teach our kids this, that as our kids are growing up and learning, we're not only applying this to our life, but we want to be responsible and teach the next generation. And so every time they have a birthday and somebody gives them $20 or somebody gives them a gift card or whatever, we say, all right, we're taking this much, and the first thing we're going to do is you're going to pay your tithe. You're going to give this much. And for a kid, it may be $1. Right? But it's beginning to teach them that principle that will carry them through life. And then you say, okay, and the next thing you need to do is you need to save. And whether that's putting money in a piggy bank for something they want to buy in the future, or whether that's as they get older, helping them to open a savings account and helping them begin to put a little bit of money into savings every time, no matter how small. And then helping them to save up, and as they want to purchase, is helping them to learn that things cost money, and so that if they want something, they've got to save it, and when the money's not there, then they can't get it yet until they save up. We must learn to discipline our minds. We must teach our kids to do the same, and it doesn't matter whether we work in fast food or whether we work as a doctor. Biblical stewardship tells us giving is the first step to winning with money. This is what giving does for you and I. When you and I choose to give first, it's a reminder of ownership. By giving first, we're reminding ourselves that this is not my money, this is what God has blessed me with. And if I steward it well, the Bible says that God can trust me with more. But if I don't steward it well, then He can't trust me. Giving is a reminder of ownership. 2, giving is praise and worship. And we say that at the end every week when we talk about it. We say, hey, we're going to take one more opportunity to worship here this morning through our giving, is because giving is an act of praise and worship. It's saying, God, as you've given to me, I'm going to joyfully give back to you, not out of a grudging spirit, not of an I have to, but God, this is my way of saying thank you. As you've blessed me, I want to just give you a little bit back. So thank you. Giving is praise and worship. And 3, giving is spiritual warfare. This is a way that we declare war, that when the enemy would say, you can't do this, you can't afford this, we're taking steps of faith. And in the spiritual, we're saying, God, I am sowing this back into you. I am going to follow you. I'm going to commit myself to you. Even before money existed, the Bible spoke of giving the first fruits with Cain and Abel. Even before the tithe came into being the law, giving was shown by Abraham giving a tithe to Melchizedek, the priest, who wasn't even a Jew at that time. Jews didn't even exist. It began with Abraham. And yet we see this giving principle that as God blesses us, the natural response, the appropriate response, is that we would give. Giving makes us more Christ-like, and a spiritually mature Christian will give. This is one of the signs of maturity. Is not are we acting out of what our pocketbook or our checkbook says, but are we acting out of faith in giving to God? Giving is the beginning and the end of winning with money. We cannot begin to win until we give, but the more we win, the more we're able to give. And this is where the Bible talks, it's more blessed to give than receive. I've learned this over the last few years as I've been able to step into this myself with things like Christmas. Christmas is coming up, and finally learning, you know what, hey, it's a lot of fun to receive presents, but I really have a lot of fun when I get to go out and shop for my nephew and I get to give him something. Right? There's things that as we win with money, as God blesses us with more, we're going to find the joys of being able to give. But we'll never discover that joy until we begin to walk in faith and give not just to our kids at Christmas, but give to the kingdom of God. After giving, stewardship calls us to save. Proverbs 21:20 says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." Right? If you didn't know, sometimes the Bible is really harsh in its truth. Because what this is saying is that if you're wise, you're going to save up some money, and if you're a fool, you're going to spend all of it. The Bible says that most of the time when we're living paycheck to paycheck is because we're making foolish decisions. Yes, there may be seasons of life where money is tight, and that may happen, and it may be beyond our control. Emergencies, things happen. But when we live that way our entire life, it's not just because things happen, it's because we refuse to discipline ourselves. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. The wise, every time they get a paycheck, they give and then they save money, but a fool gulps theirs down. A fool spends theirs however they want. Stewardship calls us to discipline ourselves and prepare for the future. And now here's the reality. Sometimes this is going to happen in steps. I'm not going to pretend like everybody can just go and start saving money today and put a lot of money aside and that everything's going to happen. I understand there is a path. There are things that we're starting out from square one, and sometimes it's a long journey to get back there. Sometimes we feel like we're starting out behind square one, and we say, hey, there's going to be a lot of things that have to happen just for me to get back to the starting point. And that's okay. It can happen in steps, but it must begin to happen. Saving is investing into ourselves and into our families for the long term. Savings is about thinking about more than right now and even more than tomorrow. Dave Ramsey's first recommendation is to save $1,000. And I would highly encourage this. Make this a priority before anything else. With bills, with everything else, do whatever it takes. Sacrifice for the next month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it takes. But make sure you get $1,000 in your bank account in savings for emergencies. That way when the car breaks down, something happens to the dog, something happens to the kid, you've at least got a little something. One of the greatest causes of stress in individuals' life, one of the greatest causes of stress in divorce and married couples' life is finances. And it comes from not having that money. The first thing you can begin to do is put $1,000 in the bank that you do not touch. It does not get pulled out unless it's for an emergency. And maybe you can go today and you can set that aside and say, hey, I don't have savings, and you can put it there now. But you set it there for when those emergencies, and hopefully they never come. But if they do, even if you don't have all of it, at least you've got something to help act as a buffer. We'll talk about debt later in this series, and we're going to talk about building and getting out of debt. But when we talk about saving, after we get out of debt, our long-term goal is that we want to save at least 3 to 6 months worth of our income. That if something were to seriously happen, some kind of accident, things happen, we lose our job, whatever it is, and now we're without income, we don't have to rush to take the first job that's available. We don't have to pray that we can get hired in at McDonald's for $10 an hour because we've got to have money to pay the bill for next week. We save money, that way when emergencies happen and things happen beyond our control, we've got time. And we've got 3 to 6 months in the bank. And again, this may be years down the road before we can make to this point, but it's discipline, it's faithfulness that gets us there. That when emergencies happen, we don't have to panic. We can rest and say, thank you, God, for providing, and we can be able to make it through and breathe for a little bit. Biblical stewardship, saving, is learning not to borrow. Is learning not to go into debt. Now, I understand there's a few things, and Dave Ramsey would totally disagree with me on vehicles. He'll tell you to drive the junkiest car you can until you save up for the car you want. Right? I understand maybe that's not always a reality. We live in New Mexico. You got to have drive miles and miles to get anywhere. It's 45 miles to Gallup. It's an hour and a half. It's 100 miles down to Albuquerque, whatever it is. And you've got to have a vehicle you can trust. But learning to discipline ourselves where maybe we want the Camaro, but for now we drive the little smart car because it's going to be better on gas, right? Is learning that discipline that we may want something in the future, but we're going to take this now and sacrifice that. That way we can live with less debt and we can get ourselves out of debt. Is learning not to go into debt for anything. We don't need to go into debt this Black Friday to be able to buy the 80-inch TV. We don't need to go into debt to buy the newest thing. We don't have to have the newest thing. That's a lie of society. Is learning to be content with what we have and save for the things that we want. Disciplining ourselves that can we have it? Is it a bad thing to have it? It's not necessarily bad. But learning that we don't need that now, that we can save for those things. Part of disciplining and getting a biblical mindset with money is learning for almost every purchase we can wait and save. We can't treat debt as normal like it is in the world today. We can't treat credit cards as free money and say, well, if I have this, then I can pay it back later because we're paying back interest on interest, and debt is always a trap. Biblical stewardship is learning to discipline ourselves and say, if I can't afford it now, then I'm going to wait. And saving is the second step of good stewardship. Biblical mindset to winning with money. God first, you give, you second, you save, and then everything else third. Right? You give, you save, and then you pay. After you've given God your tithe, your first fruits, your 10% of your income, and after you've saved money and set it aside for the long term, that's when you begin to pay everything else. That's when you begin. Every time you get a paycheck, we need to discipline ourselves. All right, I've got this paycheck. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go on Tithely because the church offers that, or I'm going to write a check because that's the way I like to keep my finances, whatever it is, and that's the first thing we do. We do that before any bill. We get on there and we pay our tithe, and we say, okay, this is how much that my family, we've sat down and decided that every time we get a paycheck, we're going to put X amount. And it may be $10. It may be $50. It may be $100. Whatever it is, it may take sacrifice, but the second thing we're going to do is we're going to put this much money into savings. And so we give, we save, and then we begin to pay our bills. And the way that we pay our bills is we first focus on our four walls, right? If we view our finances like a home, we've got to have the walls up so that we can have the roof on and to keep everybody safe. And so the first four things that we always prioritize when we pay for things is our food, making sure we've got the money we need for food. We pay for our shelter to make sure that our house is paid, our bills are paid. We pay for our transportation to make sure we've got the vehicle still going so we can get to work, and then we pay for our utilities. The reality is we can live in a house without electricity for a while. It's not going to be fun, but if we had to make a decision, at least we've got a house to live in because that bill's been paid. But then we pay for utilities, we pay for gas, we pay for electricity, we pay for whatever it takes to get in our home. And we build these four walls, making sure that we're prioritizing everything we need to do. And if we reach that point, and we begin to look at all the other bills after that, and we begin to say, well, I don't think I have enough money, then we've got to retrain our minds and we've got to take a hard look and say, okay, where's this money going? Because we may not be living within our means. If we can't afford all of our bills and if we can't afford all these things, we may have to say, well, can I really afford the car that I'm driving right now? Or do I need to get something that's going to be cheaper for a while? Are we going out every weekend? How are we spending money? Are we going to entertainment all the time? Are we going out of the house every weekend? Are we going to movies? Are we doing things all the time when the reality is we need to learn to stay at home and do a puzzle every once in a while? Are we eating out all the time? How often are we trying to have fast food? How often are we doing things? How much do we buy extra stuff when we go to Walmart that isn't a necessity? beginning to win, this first step to changing our finances is absolutely the hardest place, because we start off and we're making a decision now that I want to be healthy in the future. I want this kind of life in the future. This is where I want to be. I don't want to have to worry about money. I don't want to have to worry about these things. But we're starting with the weight of this is how we've lived for years. And we've got to change that. And to change from how we've been living to where we want to live is the hardest point in any journey. To get the discipline there, to change our lifestyle, to change our habits, to retrain ourselves, learning to control how much we spend every month aside from those essential bills. How quickly you will buy into that is the deciding factor. How much you're willing to sacrifice now is the deciding factor to how quickly you can turn things around and begin to find yourself no longer a slave to money, but with money as a tool at your disposal. Right, this journey is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. It's not going to be something that for most of us, we can go and say even 6 months from now, hey, I am debt-free. Everything is good. My life is good. Now I can start saving and I can start getting ready for retirement. I can get ready for those things. For most of us, this is going to be a marathon. We may find ourselves living really tight for a while, but if we will discipline ourselves, if we can live tight for even a few years if we have to, then you can enjoy a lifetime of freedom. You can enjoy things right now. For those of you who are younger, you can enjoy the day of grandkids. Something that's far beyond the future, where you'll be able to have the finances and the freedom to say, hey, I want to take my grandkids on a trip, and we're going to go to the zoo, and we're going to do, and not have to worry about saving up for it then, because you've been saving since now, and it'll begin to change that future for you. It'll change the weight of financial stress. As you train yourself, this will pass on to your kids, and this will become a generational blessing that if you will take the commitment today, if you will make the discipline today, then it'll bless your kids, because they're going to grow up under your discipline. They're going to see what you did, and that's how they're going to handle money. The way your marriage is, that's how their marriage is going to be. What they see you do, what your priorities are you dragging them into church every Sunday, or are you skipping it when you're too busy? What you do, your kids will follow. And if you'll make the decision now to discipline yourself with money, it'll affect your kids, and it'll affect their kids, and it'll continue on. You can make a generational difference by learning to discipline yourself now. As we go through this series, this is the challenge I'm going to give. And I want you to hear my heart, because as your pastor, we are not as a church after your money. Your money is absolutely a sign of your relationship with God. There's maturity that comes with it. There's things that it's seen, but it's not, we're not in a position. God has blessed us as a church. There are times where a pastor has to get up and he says, well, we're low on money, so we're going to preach on giving again. That's not why we're doing this. 2023 is all about getting rooted. It's about growing. We're teaching on this not because we're in desperation for money. I taught you last week, God has blessed us. As a church, we're on the other side of a $60,000 remodel. And even as we continue on in this week with different things, we're going to be less than $3,000 in for a $60,000 remodel. We're not in a position to say, like, we've got to preach on this because we need it. We're here because we're saying this is what the Bible teaches for you, and my job is to give you the whole meal. My job is to be my sister telling my nephew, you've got to have protein first. Is to say this is what the Bible teaches all the way around. And so this is what I want to challenge you with, not for the church's sake, but for your sake, as you mature and as you grow with God. We're going to give you a challenge, and this is it. I want you to take one step in faith. From where you are right now, I want you to take one step. So maybe right now, you're not giving, you're not paying your tithe. And if that's you, that's fine. Nobody else needs to know what step you're on. But if you're not paying your tithe, I'm not talking giving just $10 a week. I'm glad that you're beginning to do that. I'm glad we've got individuals that maybe they're watching online or whatever. Like maybe there's people here and you're saying, hey, I give regularly X amount of dollars. I give $10 a month. I give $20 a month. And I'm proud of you. That's a step forward. But the first step we want to encourage people to take is if you're not paying your tithe, every time you get a paycheck, not just giving a little bit, but paying that 10%, And we've got videos. You can go back and watch the series, The Blessed Life. We did it last year at the same time. It's on YouTube. You can go back and find out why we teach about the tithe, why we believe it's for today. But if you're not paying your tithe, we want to encourage you one step in faith. If you're not paying your tithe, begin to pay your tithe. One step forward. And watch God over the next year continue to take care of you. Watch God continue to provide for you and your family. Some of you, I know, last year we taught on stewardship. It's something we teach on regularly because we believe in it. And so maybe for the last year or maybe even for years, you've been paying your tithe. You faithfully, every time you get a paycheck, 10%, right? Whether it's on Tithely, whether it's in person, whether it's on Venmo, whatever it is, you get paid, and that's where you are right now. We want to encourage you, one step of faith. BGMC Sundays today. Right now, we support 6 different missionaries. All their pictures are on that back wall. You can see it every single week when you come in. My dream is that a year from now, we'd be supporting 12. I don't know how that's possible. I don't know what that looks like, but I know that missions is the heartbeat of God, and that seeing people saved is the heartbeat of God, that he will do whatever it takes to see people saved. That's why we give every single week so that people can know Jesus here, there, and everywhere. If you've been giving your tithe, I want to encourage you, one step of faith, pick up a missionary. For $25 a month, we can support a missionary. Right now, we've made pledges and commitments to support those 6, and we're really not even pulling that in. We're just, as a church, giving on faith, saying, God, we made a promise, so we're going to continue to give. But I want to encourage, if you're already paying your tithe, then pray about it for the next month. Over this month, as we're going to give this challenge every single week, I'll introduce you. I've already got 6 more missionaries that are waiting for partnership to get out to do what God is calling them to do. Paying your tithe, we want to encourage you, one step of faith. Begin at $25 a month. Support a missionary. And for those of you, maybe you're already here, and this is huge. If you're here, you're paying your tithe, you already support missions, I still want to challenge you to take one step of faith. And I would encourage you, would you pick up one more missionary for $25 a month? Now, these things are all between you and God. I'm not going to follow up. We're not going to pressure. We're not going to do these things. We just want to open the door and say, this is where we feel like God is leading as a church, and we want to give you the opportunity. If you're not paying your tithe, take a step, begin to pay the tithe. If you're paying your tithe, take a step and pick up a missionary for $25 a month. If you've got one missionary, encourage you, take a step, pick up one more. Kayla and I are going to be doing that ourselves as we lead. We want to lead by example, and we're praying out of those 6 missionaries, we're going to pick one up. We're going to take one, and we're going to say, okay, every month we're going to begin to support this missionary because we believe that this is what God wants. So today we're going to pray, but I want to encourage you, no matter where you're at, would you just allow God to challenge you? Taking those steps of faith, and as we head over into the next month or you head into your next paycheck, making that decision, God, I've never tithed before. God, my family's got this going on, but we're going to trust you and pay that tithe for the first time. Here, I don't even care if it's gross or net. We're not even going to worry about that. I think God will just be happy if we give. Right? And we'll begin to do those things. We'll begin to pray over the next month, and if God leads you and say, hey, I want you to give to another missionary, then begin to make that commitment as we get ready for BGMC next month. And if you're there doing one, then allow God to challenge you and stretch you. But we're just going to pray, and I'm just going to pray that God would begin to speak to you this morning as we begin to chew a little bit on some protein. Holy Spirit, we just thank you for today. We thank you for all you're doing, and we just ask that you would lead us throughout this day, that you would have your way, God. Would you help us to be a generous people? Because you're a giving God. For God so loved the world that he gave, Lord. That is who you are. So help us to reflect you, that as we follow you, as we're Christians, that we are little Christ, that we would be like you in our giving. Lord, I pray that you would build your people up in faith and strength, that you would show them that you'll always be there. God, that as we put you and your kingdom first, we can trust that all the other things will be given to us. Lord, thank you for growing us and stretching us. In Jesus' name, amen.